Okay, so let's get back to what we have here. All right, yeah. So as we have said, what does it, when we're doing our research, we want to review the literature, we want to explore the body of knowledge about an area of interest. We want to find out if I am going to visit Amolata and I haven't been there, the best thing to do will be to ask somebody who comes from there. The best thing would be to inquire from them about Amolata. What are the points of interest? What should I know? What should I be cognizant about? What cultures should I be aware? What shouldn't I know? What are the dangerous things to talk about or dangerous places to avoid? That's what we do in life, and that's what's going to be happening here. So for whatever you're going to do, your first point of call has got to be, what does the body of knowledge tell us? And we can actually, even if you're brave enough, you can give me your research topic here, and we reflect on what and where we can get the knowledge from. And so it is important that you source for literature that is current. So we need to make sure that the literature is current. In some universities, there is even a limit as to how old your literature should be. Some universities will say 10 years. Makerere doesn't have that limit, but obviously we want you to be sourcing the latest literature. It has to be current. It also has to be relevant. This may seem obvious. Yeah, it has to be relevant. Yeah, it has to be current. It has to be relevant to what you're researching on. One of the things that literature helps is it helps you get an appreciation of the. So we have a topic there which we shall use for our discussion. So it helps us get an appreciation. Michael, thanks for that. We shall use that for our as a case study. Why is it important? It helps us get an appreciation of the latest debates in your intending research. Now, remember, when we're doing these researches, when we're doing our project, when we're doing our dissertation, remember that the aim is to generate new knowledge. I think I better even put this in red. Remember, the aim, when we're doing your research, when you're doing your dissertation, remember that the aim of the research is to generate new knowledge. And so implied in this is the fact that there's no way you'll generate new knowledge without you knowing what the current knowledge is about, what you are what your intended research is about. So if I can use the example of what Michael has posted here, he has said it's usually hard to juggle between sharing the screen and reading whatever, but we shall use that as our case study. So remember that in everything that you're doing, you have to generate new knowledge. It might be new data, it might be new method, it might, so new data, new method, new analysis, new techniques. So whatever you're doing, at the end of the day, we are going to ask you, what do we know now that we didn't know before? That's one of that's what we're going to ask. So a simple question is, I'm taller than many people here. It will be useless to see if I'm taller than many people, because that is already known. And many times that's where the challenge is about our research. So if we are going to come up with new knowledge, if we're going to come up with new concepts, if we're going to come up with new solutions, if we're going to come up with new solutions, we obviously need to have an appreciation of what the current solutions are, what the current techniques are, what the current methods are, what the current data is. You need to have that appreciation so that at the end of the day, we are able to titulate and say, this is the newness. Now, actually, if you do your literature review well enough, it can also help you identify. It can also help you identify what the research problem is. Many of you will recall, if you have done your undergraduate studies, some of you got away with the research problem, which isn't a research problem. But when you read, when you explore the body of knowledge, one of the things that you want to do is to identify a research problem. From what people are doing, what are some of the issues that they identify as problems? What are the researchable problems? We don't just do any problem, and that is also another challenge that we have in our researches. Many people will say, this is the problem, and at the end of the day, the problem still exists. So should we say that you haven't done any work because you haven't solved the problem? A good example, it could be something like, there's a problem of poverty in, let me use my district so that I am politically correct. There's a problem of poverty in Sironko. Now, after your research for 2, 3, 4, 5 months, have you eradicated poverty? Most probably, you haven't. So was that the problem? Was that the research problem that you needed to identify? And so by looking at how people frame their research problems, you will have a guidance on how you should frame your research problem. And this is especially important for PhD students. It's especially important for PhD students. What is the problem? Is it a research problem? For master's students, it may not be as ominous, but clearly, what is the problem? How do you identify the problem? You cannot do this by just sitting and thinking and whatever. It will have to come from your literature. So your literature is where you begin. It is from here that we get a guide. So we have our literature. We start with the literature, and it helps us frame our problem. Literature enables us frame our objectives. So with the literature review, it helps us frame our research problem, frame our objectives, and then from the literature, we are also able to design our methodology. So we start with the literature. That's why I'm giving it the prominence here. We start with the literature. It should guide us in framing our problem. It should guide us in framing our objectives, and it should guide us in designing our methodology. Now, many of you, and this is where we have problems with you when we're examining your dissertations and your work, one looks at the literature and there is no link with your objectives. I do not see how your literature has informed your objectives. I don't see how your literature has informed your methodology. You have put together some literature, and yet when I look at your methodology, you've presented other things that are not related to what you have in your literature. And so what I'm trying to emphasize in today's class is that we need to put priority to your literature. And I get this, many students come, they have their proposals, and you look through and you're like, this is where you are at fault. Your literature, why is it important? It has not, I don't see how your objectives will be accomplished by looking through your literature. I don't see how your methodology. So a classic example is somebody will discuss a method in the literature, and in the methodology, none of the discussed methods will be present. He or she will talk about something else. So when we are looking at your literature, we should be able to see, for your given challenge, what are the possible methods available? Let us say A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Let's see that in the literature. When it comes to your methodology, we should now see the method that you have chosen. So if in literature for a given exercise, we have 3 approaches in your methodology, you will tell us which methodology you will use and why you have chosen that method. And the justifications can be various. Justification could be you're choosing that method because whereas in these other countries, they have a lot of data. In Uganda, we are data constrained, and therefore we've chosen method C because it works best in this situation. So, however, from the literature, we should be able to see all the methods. We should be able to see all the analyses that are possible. And in your methodology, we should be able to see what you have chosen to do. I like giving an example of a recipe. What is a recipe? In a recipe, we see the ingredient and the order with which we're going to mix them. We're going to use them. And that is the case with your methodology. I should be able to repeat your methodology and come up with your identical results. But where am I getting that methodology from? You don't pluck it from the sky. We have to get it from the literature. And so literature is where we begin. If there's one lesson I want to pick from here, it is that it is the bedrock of your research. We start with the literature, and the literature guides us throughout. The other place where your literature will become important is when you're discussing your results, and maybe we shall have that discussion in the second semester. But for the moment, where our emphasis is on developing a proposal, I want to emphasize that we need to begin with literature, and literature will help guide us. Literature will help guide us in framing our problem, will help guide us in framing our objective, and will direct us in designing our methodologies. So a brief recap: when you're going to do, as you think of your research, as you do your project, remember you need to generate new knowledge by either coming up with new data, new methods. A good example is these days we are now into artificial intelligence, machine learning, and buzzwords like that, cloud computing. So maybe we want to explore how does that improve? How is that an improvement on what is been done before, or maybe a method has been applied, in a new place. A method has been used in South Africa. Do we know if it would work here? That is the definition of new knowledge. We don't know if it will apply. So, and for us to determine whether we're heading in the right direction, we need to explore the body of knowledge. We need to review the literature. We need to explore what has been done. What have other researchers done? What methods have they come up with? What are the debates? What is the source of data? Where do they get their data? So why is it important? Helps us appreciate current methods, sources of data. It helps us appreciate sources of data, gives us information on sources of data. Who is doing what? What are they actually? And this especially goes to you PhD students. If you stretch your research too long, events might overtake you, and you have nothing to share. So, even for master's students, we are starting your research now. You are picking on a new method, a new technique, a new technology, and in the end, by the time you finish in 4 or 5 years, by the way, we have people who have taken 10 years on masters. By the time you're submitting your work, examiner will tell you there's nothing new here. So we need to move fast. We need to be on top of things and make sure that we are on top of our game. So why is literature review important? It's meant to inform our research, enables us to articulate our objectives, guides us in developing a conceptual framework for research that necessitates a conceptual framework. It guides us in developing our methodologies, get an appreciation of the latest debates in what we are doing so that we can chart a way forward. It also helps us, I think I've talked about this, identifying the research problem, helps us appreciate the current methods, gives information on sources of data, and your literature has to be current, has to be relevant. And so this is just a pictorial of what I've been trying to say. Literature review helps us looks like a back mirror, back view mirror. What's our problem? What are our objectives? And then looking forward, what's the methodology that we are going to use? So in effect, by the time you come to defend your proposal, we will need to see what your problem is, what your objectives are, and what your methodology is. Even if we don't have a section on literature, the literature should be able to inform us on what your problem is, what your objectives are, and what your methodology will be. And so for you to be able to come up with a good proposal, you will need to have read extensively. You need to read extensively. And for me, even at undergrad, my students know that if you come with just 5 journals, we are not in good books. So about sources of literature, it has to be current, it has to be relevant. We consider journals, conference, proceedings, reports as well. And also sourcing of literature, it has to be current, it has to be relevant. We look at journals, conference proceedings, and reports. To carry out a good literature review, it has to be extensive. The other thing that we need to appreciate is that it is not about copying and pasting. It is about reviewing the literature. So I would like us to look at the topic that has been given to us so that we can see what headway we can make with it. Exploring low-cost vertical housing for the informal settlement of Kamocha 2. So we have a topic here, exploring low-cost vertical housing for informal settlement of Kamocha 2. When I look at this topic, and by the way, for me, there's nothing like a good or bad topic. Even with the best sounding topic, a student can mess it up and it becomes lousy. So it's not about the topic, it's about the content. So if we were supposed to develop a proposal about exploring low-cost vertical housing for informal settlements of Kamocha 2, my question would be, where has it been done before? How has it been done? What were the key issues? What was important? What data do you need to know about this? Who has done similar work? And when these people are doing this sort of research, what were they trying to solve? What problem were they trying to solve? Because ultimately, that has to reflect in what you're doing. Another thing you need to appreciate as you're doing this research is that your topic is not cast in stone. So it's exploring low-cost vertical housing for the informal settlement of Kamocha 2. It doesn't mean that that's what it has to be. As you do the work, as you proceed, you might realize that rewarding it may bring it out better. So it's cyclic, it is iterative. It is something we do continuously. So from this topic, the question I would be asking you, why do you want to do it? What is the issue? What do you want to solve? When you say exploring low-cost vertical housing, is it that we don't have information about what this will involve? Is it a question, is it from the technical perspective about the materials? Is it from a policy perspective? Those are things that will come to mind. And with that should guide us as to what our objectives should be. I'm going to do a search. I'm going to do a search for existing literature. So let me share my screen so that we do the search together. So I'm doing a search about low-cost vertical housing for informal settlements. We can first see what is happening generically, and then we can proceed. And as you can see, there is lots. Now, one of the things you need to sift through is what is relevant, what is irrelevant. But I can see that there are a number of whatevers. I can see getting urban density to work in informal settlements in Africa. I don't know what that is about. Empower by urban think tank, vertical versus horizontal constraints, moving in up, rethinking the future of informal settlements, building whatevers. And so straight away, we can see that work has already been done. And part of the review of literature involved digging in to see what has been done. And from what has been done, how does that guide you in how you should frame your objective? There's only one way to do it. So let us see what... can you see the journal? What page?
Yes, Prof.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, it's reading getting urban density to work in informal settlements in Africa. Now,
Doctor,
the other
only see half of it.
yes, that's what you can see for the moment. Now, the other thing I need to mention also is when you are doing certain research, depending on the area of interest, there are certain names which have to appear. There are certain names which have to appear. You know, informal settlements, wherever. There are people who have done extensive research in that area. We need to see that in your list. So, what are some of the things that we get from this journal? For example, it's talking about getting urban density to work in informal settlements. Density is advocated for as a crucial mechanism for promoting sustainability. As you can see here, it's telling us about density. So as you begin your literature, one of the first things you're going to begin doing is to start having relevant headings. And so that from this journal, for example, we are getting to know about density, what it is and why it is important. Proponents of density see the potential of concentrated population growth. So that could be one heading. Here we're talking about getting urban density to work is not straightforward in practice. See, that's now an issue that should raise a flag, and they're telling you the tensions and trade-offs involved in increasing density. So that could be another heading: challenges of increasing density. You have that as a heading. And so from this paper, we shall get different aspects about density. I can see dimensions of density, residential density. Planners, I'm sure you'll appreciate this more and more. And then you pick up your key points and so on and so forth. So after you've done this with this paper, essentially, you will be looking at another journal. You can see something from, I don't know which council this one is. Let us see what it says. International Science, whatever. Moving on up. This one's a blog. I also like reading blogs. It helps us understand things much more simply. So it talks about cities, densification in many cities, talks about challenges, and this can be this information can fit in your existing headings, or you can come up with new headings depending on the new information that you are compiling. And when you have an accumulation of all of this literature, you can now start thinking and articulating when people are doing this, when people are researching the issue of low-cost vertical housing for informal settlements, what are the issues there? Yeah, so when people are doing this sort of work, low-cost vertical housing for informal settlement, what is it that they want to solve? You know, is it that we don't know if we have information how it will work? Is it about the materials? Is it a policy issue? And the other thing that you need to appreciate when you're doing your research is that depending on your perspective, there is a lot of research in that direction. If you are, let's say you're into construction management and you're talking about materials to enable us to think, you know, low-cost vertical housing, you can get research in that direction. You might be a planner, and for you're interested in planning issues regarding low-cost vertical housing, you'll get a lot of work in that direction. You might be an architect, you might be whatever, and that's where the issue of relevant information comes into play. You know, you make sure that you collect information that is relevant to your research, because it is in that space that you will be able to design what your problem statement is. You'll be able to design, you will be able to think what your objectives will be. And so, for example, by looking at all this literature, what would be the 2 to 3 things? Yeah. What would be the 2 to 3 things that you need to address in order to solve your problem? Remember, when you're thinking about your problem statement, we are thinking about a gap, a knowledge gap. Is it a method? Is it an information gap? Is it a method gap? Are we in a situation where by using traditional means? So for example, those of you who are in the GIS realm, the discussion is usually around introduction of geoinformation techniques. So maybe we have been using traditional techniques to solve a certain problem. The traditional techniques are time consuming, they take a lot of time, they're probably subjective, and we therefore want to explore geoinformation to see if we can get as good results by using geospatial techniques. So that could be your problem. And so for you to be able to, if that's your problem, your work is supposed to be the solution. The only way you will be able to articulate your problem is by seeing what other people have done, what have they sought to solve, and that can guide you in what your problem should be. And having seen what the problem should be, we now go to the objectives. Now, having articulated your problem, having articulated your objectives, the next thing that you will be thinking of doing will be your methodology. What is the recipe for your research? How are we going to articulate it? Now, tomorrow's class, we are going to be looking at where we can get a lot of this literature. What are the options we have? I hope I won't spoil tomorrow's class. There are times when you see literature and there is a challenge that to access this literature, you need to pay a certain amount of money. Tomorrow's class, you will see how the university provides access. As you can see here, access provided by Makerere University. So tomorrow, that will be the discussion. Charles, your hand is up.
Thank you, Professor. Somewhere as you went on the internet there, you opened a blog.
Yes.
Sometimes personally, when I'm looking for literature, I tend to look for some sources which have extensive kind of a citation that can say this say of author and what and everything. But a blog seems to be something simple that may not extensively refer to. I don't know. You said that sometimes you like reading them, but I don't know to what extent can we use them as reference materials in our research.
Okay. Now, I've told you, like, I like blogs because many times blogs have a simplified way of addressing something. So, for example, let us say you want to use artificial intelligence to solve urban planning methods. Now, from urban planning, the thought of artificial intelligence is already scary. A blog would be a good entry point. Would be a good entry point into understanding about artificial intelligence, about programming, about all those things. And once you get that foothold into the discipline, you can now step or gradually graduate into the more complicated stuff. So, and this is probably only relevant when we're doing research at the interface of disciplines. So I can, let us say you want to explore machine learning techniques in identifying slum dwellings from satellite imagery. You may not have the competences yet, but you want to do the research in that area. That is something that has interested you. And so a blog, many blogs are by their design simplified, and you can start there before we now go into something more complex. So as I've mentioned, your next challenge is going to be, where do we get the literature? Luckily enough for you, Makerere University provides means by which you can access this literature, and that will be the discussion for tomorrow. We shall have the librarian come and take you through all of this, and you'll be amazed at the sources that you have. And what I'm trying to say is that ultimately you have no excuse not to search for the literature. If you don't have this access, you may be greatly impaired. And then on Wednesday, we shall be learning how do we synthesize, how do we do this in our work. So back to what we've put together here, I want to emphasize that as we begin our researches, as we begin our work, let us give prominence to the research, to literature. Let us start here. Let us invest in looking for literature, in looking for relevant literature, looking for recent literature. You know, there is nothing as daunting as getting feedback from the examiner informing you that the methods you have chosen are out of date, are extinct, and it happens. We get those reports. And for you who are all of you are hopeful Plan A students, and so the burden of proof on you is much higher. And so these are some of the things that we look out for. Is the literature there? Does the candidate have an extensive, actually, when we on Friday, I'll probably take you through what we look out for when we're examining you. But one of the sections is about the literature. Has the candidate carried out an extensive review of literature? Is it relevant? Are the references recent? Are they current? Are they well cited? So all of these are things that we evaluate. All of these are things that we examine. So I would like to request that we start, that as you begin your journey of research, please let us begin with literature. Let us begin with the body of knowledge, and let that guide you to determine your problem statement. Let it guide you to fashion your objectives. Let it guide you to fashion your methodology. And if we have your literature should be current, should be relevant. We can get from journals, from conference, preferably peer-reviewed conference proceedings, and in some cases your reports. We evaluate your literature in terms of if it is extensive. It's not about copying and pasting, but it's about synthesizing the body of knowledge. It's about reviewing the literature. How do we piece together information from different sources? You will see from literature, and maybe on Friday, depending on the time that we have, we shall see how to practically do some of these things. But for the moment, I wanted to emphasize that please know that your literature is the bedrock of your research. When I'm examining, and for all of you, as long as you're in the School of the Built Environment, I am one of your examiners. So I am giving you I'm your examiner. During your Viva, these are some of the things that we shall be asking about. Your literature, is it relevant? Is it current? Are you talking of things which we should have we stopped doing long ago? If you're a land surveyor and you're talking about using a theodolite, when now we are using continuously operate reference network, course network, you're in trouble. So we want current information, current debates, current research. Ultimately, we want your research to be relevant, and it can only be relevant if you are considering current. Of course, for PhD, it's a lot more complex, a lot more complicated, but still, literature will be your bedrock. So in tomorrow's discussion, the debate is going to be about what resources does the university enable us to have access to. And if we have time, we shall also have a demonstration about a given topic. How do we get information regarding that topic? How do we get the journals? What do they tell us? And so on and so forth. So with those few words, I would like to thank you for your patience. Apologies. I am sure they'll tell. The week is already packed up, but if possible, we might invite her at another time, maybe next semester, so she makes her presentation. But for now, I hope that as you're working on your proposal, please let us start from the literature. Don't go and think up issues. Go and think up. I think this will make a good objective. Your literature should guide you in what your objective should be. Your literature should guide you in what your problem should be. Your literature should guide you in what your methodology will be. So, ladies and gentlemen, if there is one or two questions, I'd be happy to address it. So please, before you compile your proposals, make sure you've read at least 20, 30, journals, relevant journals. Yeah.
Hello.
I think it would be better if you sent me an email. If DM me here, it may not be useful, but just send me an email. So let us resume from there tomorrow, same time. And I am hoping that this will help guide you in your research. And I'll talk more about this on Friday. My aim is that we all are able to finish in 2 years. Now, that's my aspiration. So you are either joining me, or if you're enjoying here too much, you will stay longer. But my aim is that we all finish within the 2 years. So please,
Hello.
Yes, is that a question?
Yes. Good evening, Professor.
Yes, good evening.
Oh yes. With reference to literature, is there a limit for my career? Like, if I limit 20 years back, does it Does it make
20
sense?
years is preferably the majority of your citations should be recent, 5, 6 years. 20 years, I mean, now like if you're in GIS, what we're doing 20 years is is out of date.
Because with reference to, let me say, there are some friends I've seen or I've observed, they have a topic whereby getting data within the range of 5 years or 6 years at times is a bit tricky for them. So what do you advise in such a situation?
That is why you have to attend tomorrow's class. So that you see how that should not be an excuse for a career student. How do we get literature?
Okay,
good.
Okay.
Yes,
thank you.
Linda?
Thank you very much, Prof.
Yes.
I have a question. You mentioned something about literature review informing the ideal methodology that you would use. How about if my proposal is about a methodology in a certain field, and that's what I'm trying to develop? How would the literature be for comparison?
You see?
Or how would it inform the methodology?
Yeah, so this is, so whatever methodology you've come up with, there is a basis upon which you have come up with that methodology. And unless it is groundbreaking and no one has done something in that area, chances are that there is literature about how different people have done the same thing. Let us say we have 4 ways of carrying out evaluation. Maybe you want to try out one. We will see that. But there is no way, especially at masters, especially at masters, there is no way you're going to come up with a method that stands alone. So you will need to explore. When people are doing this sort of thing, what are the issues? What are the sources of data? Where do they get the data? How do they manipulate the data? Now, you will find maybe journal A considers data sources A, B, C, D. Maybe journal 2 considers A, D, and E. Maybe another journal considers just ABC. Now, when you are deciding the sources of data, you have to decide which of those methods best captures your situation. So your literature cannot stand on its own. We need to see from your literature what method you have chosen and why. In your review of literature, we will see all the methods that you have come across in literature. In your methodology, we'll see the method you have chosen and why. Why have you chosen that method and not the other one? I don't know if that has made it clear or more confusing.
No, I get your point, but actually you mentioned it like if I am trying to, because I'm trying to investigate something new, what I think would be a viable methodology for certain research. I'm just, yes, maybe you're trying to do something groundbreaking. How would that work with the existing literature? Because it's I'm assuming nobody has done it before, nobody has explored that method before.
Okay. Yeah, that is very rare. But for that method that you are thinking of, chances are that it has been applied in other domains, and so the literature will be about that method, how it has worked, where it has worked, and of course your problem statement would be this method has been used in domains A, B, C, D, and we don't know if we want to know if it will be applied. And a good example is those recent things: machine learning, artificial intelligence. Let's say applied to construction management. We know we have used machine learning in the domains of health, domains of engineering. Probably we don't know how best it will work in this area. So the literature will guide us in that direction.
That's okay.
But for masters, it is very, very improbable that you'll be doing something. Probably PhD. It's close. You may do that. Yes, a couple of hands, they have gone down. Are they still up? Charles, was your hand up, or Peter?
Prof, I just wanted to further the discussion with Linda. Maybe I just for your guidance, Prof, because if it is a groundbreaking research on a methodology maybe which has not been applied, would it be making sense to look at what has been happening related to that very methodology and the weaknesses of what has been happening, so that you are paving ground for what you are going to do? Because if the literature is not there and it's something very new and you need to really justify it, my thinking would be you would dwell on what is currently the practice and why what you are thinking. I don't know whether that makes sense.
Even for anything groundbreaking, and let me give an example. For my PhD, I was looking at what we call machine learning. Those are new branches of artificial intelligence. But even as the application was new, the theory was old. The theory was developed in the 1960s. It was a new area, but there are people who had done some work in other fields. So that was what I was reviewing and arguing a case for its application in remote sensing, whatever. So there is still literature you need to review the method. I'm sure it's not your invention. That it's not. Yeah, it's not a method it's not your invention that you're coming up with. Most times we are piggybacking on methods which were developed or have been applied in another area, and we want to see how they'll apply in our domains. So, and as is the case, you will find that, and this is especially for you people who are doing PhD, you will find that there is still a community of people exploring that unique area. And now one of the challenges you have is to make sure that you're on top of the literature which comes from me. When I was a PhD student, I knew the labs. There were not many labs which were doing similar work to what I was doing, but I made sure that as soon as a paper came out, I knew where it was from, what it was saying. And so for PhD, literature review is not an event. It's a process. It's continuous. There was another hand?
Well, mine, Professor, mine, I was just inquiring whether it's really a rule, because about citing old literature, because there are certain trends, and probably you may wish to give like a history of events where they could have started from. And I think wouldn't you end up having to refer to that time 30 or 50 years ago?
Yeah, so like I told you, for my PhD, I was looking at something which was developed in 1969. So as far as that theory was concerned, it made sense to quote 1969. But my publications had to be more recent. So that should be the exception rather than the norm. As Osele was saying, the recent literature is scarce, so we might have literature of 20 years ago. That should be, and that is for seminal papers. There are those papers which, for example, if you're looking at, we call them genetic algorithms, for those of you who are into artificial intelligence, genetic algorithms, this is a concept which comes from long ago, but you would want to quote that, but now talk about the more recent applications. So it's not that you do not quote older citations. They have to be seminal quotations, but the bulk of your publications, we are talking of 80% plus, should be recent, which brings a challenge when you stretch your research. 2 years in the master's, instead of finishing it in being a research over 1 year, you do it over 4 years. Now, there your literature becomes challenging. Michael, your hand is up.
Yes, Professor, thank you for the guidance. My simple question would be, what would be your take as far as YouTube as a source of data or a source of information?
I use YouTube to learn, but not as citable, because, YouTube, anyone can throw anything on YouTube.
It's true. It's true.
And so why we go for referenced data is because it has been peer-reviewed. A journal, as you will discover, some of you, I have students who have published their research. The reason we go for peer-reviewed journals or peer-reviewed conference proceeding is because it has been peer-reviewed. Okay. The work has been assessed and considered worthwhile. The other thing which I will use the opportunity to mention is you also have to make sure that you are citing credible sources of information. We are living in an information age. There are places where, as long as I pay, the work doesn't have to be reviewed. They'll just publish it. Whether it is rubbish, grammatical errors, they will publish it. So your journals have to be from credible sources, and it would be good. So that will be the import of tomorrow's class. Where and how do we get credible journals? How do we look? What are the resources we have at our disposal?
Yes,
as Professor. Yeah. So
YouTube, I did.
So for YouTube,
yes, I did pose that question just in regard to the fact that, for instance, you're searching for certain information, and you seem to find some credible source of information on YouTube. How then would you get it citable into your work?
No. We don't use YouTube. So what you'd use YouTube to is to maybe learn,
Yes.
You learn how do they use this, how do they discuss that. And actually, on YouTube, you will find that they will give a reference to the journal.
Okay.
Yes, that's what you should look out for. In terms of learning, appreciating, yes, you can see what the YouTube is about, the discussions and the like. But in terms of citing, you wouldn't survive with that.
Okay.
Because yes, you may say it is credible, but it has to be peer reviewed for us to accept it. It has to be peer reviewed.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other question? Okay. Thank you. It's been a lovely interaction. Please, let's resume tomorrow. I'm hoping you'll be able to keep time, and we will explore the resources that are available to you as a student, so that you don't give the excuse of no data. Maybe one thing I would like to encourage, please, as a precursor, make sure that you all have a Makerere University email, because the efficacy or the ability to be able to access these resources is going to depend on that. So if you don't have an email, please contact our IT department to make sure that you get that. Tomorrow's class will depend on your ability to access through your email. So there being no further business, let's resume tomorrow. Thank you for making time to be here. And as you are going through your work, begin thinking. I know some of you may have a semblance of a proposal. Ask yourself, is your literature being informed by your problem statement, or your problem statement is being informed by your literature, and so on and so forth. So have a good night, have a good evening, and let us touch base tomorrow.